Okay. Welcome, everyone, to today's online book club discussion via artmuseumteaching.com. I'm Mike Morawski, founding editor of artmuseumteaching.com and also director of education and public programs here at the Portland Art Museum. And thank you for joining us today. Today's discussion features a series of authors and editor from the new publication Multiculturalism in Art Museums Today. Just came out within the last month, and you can order your copy at roman.com, the publisher, or Amazon. It's a great, fantastic book, and I'm so glad we've got some authors and one of the editors with us today to talk more about this, and we're going to be answering questions too during it. The book chapters and case studies reveal how the union of museums and critical multiculturalism can guide museum educators to address misrepresentation, exclusivity, accessibility, and educational inequity. And before we begin, a quick note about, to those of you that are viewing this via Google Hangout, we are using the Q&A feature. So on the left side of your screen, if you're in the Hangout window, you'll see a little Q&A icon. If you click on that, it'll let you ask questions during the session, and we encourage you to do so. And we'll pop up any of those questions that we want to address or that pop up. It looks like we've got Riley with us. Yay, hello.
Hi.
And for those of you that are watching on YouTube streaming or do not want to use the Q&A feature on the Google Plus Hangout, you can tweet your questions using hashtag #ArtMuseumTeaching. Hashtag #ArtMuseumTeaching, and I'll keep an eye on the Twitter feed, so if you have questions that way, we can answer them as well. So before we get started, just quick special thanks, and Briley, I'm glad that you're joining us, because I wanted to thank you for helping organize this. Briley Rasmussen is not only co-editor of artmuseumteaching.com and works with me on the site, but also is the author of one of the chapters in the book, and has helped organize this with the authors that are participating. And then special thanks to Joni Acuff, who's joined us, and also Laura Evans. They're the editors of the book, and they've been working with us to have this special series of posts on artmuseumteaching.com this month that feature many of the authors of the book and kind of expand on some of the issues and bring out new case studies and practices that have come out of some of the practices that are mentioned in the book. So special thanks, and then thanks to all the authors who participated in the blog posts. I know that took extra time, but I really appreciate that. So let's begin with a quick round of introductions of those that are here on the Hangout with me today. Alicia, would you like to start, and then maybe we'll go down sort of the little headshots at the bottom of the screen. Are you with me, Alicia?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'm currently director of cultural programs at the Education San Antonio, which belongs to Texas A&M San Antonio. Can you all hear me? Because I have problems.
We're hearing you, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, never not now. Riley, why don't we skip over to you, and we'll see if she gets connected back again.
Okay. I am Briley Rasmussen, and I contributed to the volume. I'm trying to figure out which number I am. I think I'm 11? No, I'm not. Oh, I'm number 10. So Chapter 10, Code Switching in the Art Museum, Increasing Access for English Learners. And I formerly worked at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where I also worked with my co-author, Sofia Gutierrez. And our work really stemmed out of our work in Los Angeles. I have lived and worked in Los Angeles on and off for 15 years, and Sofia for over 20. So really kind of drawing upon that experience of working in a multicultural urban museum. And I am currently completing my PhD. So, yeah, that's me.
Thanks. Joni?
Oh, I'm Joni Acuff, one of the co-editors for the text. I currently work at the Ohio State University, and I'm an assistant professor in art they just changed the name, hold on, Arts Administration, Education, and Policy.
You got it right, Joni.
Yeah, I gotta get it right. Before that, I worked at the University of North Texas with the other co-editor, Laura Evans. We actually went to school together at Ohio State, so we've had a long relationship, which I'll talk more about once we start talking about how this book came to be. But my studies in museum education came through my thesis. When I got my MA at UT Austin, I looked at 2 museum education programs and was trying to figure out the differences between certain programs for certain demographics. And so that's where my interest came, as far as like thinking about different multicultural curriculum for different populations. Maybe you can go next, Veronica.
Okay, I was going by the bottom of the screen, and I think.
Oh, I'm last on the screen. Looks like.
Oh, all right.
We're all in different orders.
Different orders. Okay.
Veronica.
I'm happy to go. I'm Veronica Betancourt. I am a PhD candidate at The Ohio State University, which is why I know that it's the Arts Administration, Education, and Policy Department, which is a super long name. Before my graduate studies, I worked at the National Gallery of Art in DC in the Modern Contemporary Department, which was wonderful. And I feel very fortunate to have contributed to this book, a chapter on engaging Latino visitors and visitor studies, looking at the Denver Art Museum with my co-author, Madalena Salazar. So I don't know which chapter number that is, because I don't have my book next to me. 12. It's 12. It's number 12.
Yeah, there you go.
Cynthia, do you want us to bounce back to you now that you've got a new connection?
Oh, back to me?
Yeah, that sounds good. Just we cut you off right while you were telling us.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I was saying I'm Alicia again. I'm Director of Cultural Programs at the Educational and Cultural Arts Center, which is part of Texas A&M University San Antonio, in San Antonio, Texas. And I'm also a PhD candidate at Florida State University in the Department of Art Education with a concentration in arts administration. So I'm really happy to have been able to participate in this book. I thank Johnny and Laura for this. And this is a very important topic. So I'm really glad to be here as well to discuss a little bit more with the rest of the authors and go from there.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Mariana.
Yeah. Hi. I'm Mariana Adams, and I wrote a chapter with my colleague Judy Koch on sort of where we're stuck. And I will tell you that Judy and I were truly stuck. We felt pretty passionately about this, and thanks to Joni and Laura's very sensitive, I don't know if I'd call it handling, but it was sort of handling of us. Like we were about to say, look, we thought we could do this. We're just stuck. We keep hitting this wall. And Judy and I, when we worked at the Institute for Learning Innovation, would talk about this issue a lot. And then she went on to the AGO, the Nelson Atkins, and now is back at the Nelson Atkins. But we kept just kind of getting to the point. We both interviewed a lot of people in the field who were doing some interesting things, and I said, you know, the basic point we kept coming up with is like, this is hard. This is really difficult. So that was where Laura and Joni invited us to really explore and think about, and to not keep trying to say, oh, we have answers, but to say that answers are hard to, you know, it's the process that you have to work through. That's it.
Great, fantastic, thanks, and thanks everyone. Such a great group that I think will, you know, shouldn't have any trouble having a good conversation. And I just wanted to, I've framed this all for everybody who's joining us as participants, but we try to keep this as conversational as we can, and casual and informal. So I invite everyone who's here on the Hangout to chime in, and we've got people asking questions on the Q&A feature as well as via Twitter, so I'll chime in with those. I've asked Briley to sort of help facilitate because of her involvement on the project, but anybody, we're all facilitators, so anyone can chime in at any time. I've got a couple questions, but I'll kind of hold off on some of those until a little bit later. But Joni, I thought that one of the ways to kind of get us started a little bit, because people might be watching this that might not be as familiar with the book, would be to tell us a little bit about the sort of the thinking that you and Laura were doing to kind of get the book project started. And my big question is always kind of why now? Where's the urgency of getting this book out now? And maybe even why wasn't it out 10 years ago or 12 years ago or something like that? Because one of the great things you do in the book is kind of trace some of the history of the literature on this topic and some of the gaps, the big gaps that exist.
Well, the beginning of the book started when Laura and I both had our tenure track meetings at UNT, and so we were under the impression like, oh my God, we need a book. So we were friends for about 5 or 6 years before we even talked about what each other did in their research. So as we had that conversation, it came out to be that we saw links in our research. So mine in multiculturalism, hers in museum education, but her research was around feminism in museum education. And so we said, okay, let's do a proposal. And in the process of a proposal, you have to do a lot of research about what's already out there. And once we did that research, it came to be that we saw absolutely nothing that combined these two ideas as far as practical thinking. There's a lot of theoretical stuff that's out there, but not a lot of stuff to actually give somebody something to hang on to, something to actually use in the field. So we scouted out a few publishers, and one, which was Roman Littlefield, actually said this has not really been done before, and they really grabbed onto our ideas, and they supported us in kind of letting us go with it as we wanted to go with it. So we started out with the idea that, you know, we need to have chapters in here that actually tell somebody something, not a lot of theoretical stuff, not what should happen, but what has been done, whether it be negative, whether it be positive, whether it be, you know, it worked, it didn't work, but we really wanted something that practitioners as well as museum educators in universities could hold on to and actually use for their practices every day. So that's how the book came to be, and that's how it came to be right now, because there is really nothing out there that's so practical, like nothing that I've ever really seen. And being that I'm more of I'm the critical multiculturalist, she's the museum educator, our relationship was essential to each other because she didn't really know how to talk about multicultural language, and I didn't really know how to talk about museum education language that much. So we really fed on each other's knowledge. I took a role that she couldn't take, she took a role that I couldn't take, and it just worked out perfectly because I was able to look through, when we did the call, I was able to look through all the chapters and see how people talked about multiculturalism. Was it in a superficial way? Was it essentializing? And I was able to make judgments based on what my research is about, which is multiculturalism, to see if people were really doing what they say they were trying to do. So that's kind of why now. That's how we came up with it.
So I got a quick follow-up question, but then I definitely will toss it out to anybody here in the group. I liked how you ended, whether people are really doing what they're saying they're doing. So are people in museums really doing what they say they're doing? Or do you feel like there's a little bit of, maybe it's an unfair question, but I'm kind of curious about that perspective because, you know, is there more talk about multiculturalism and less doing, or do you feel like that in sort of getting all these calls for, or through the call for papers and things, do you really feel like people are really doing a lot of stuff out there?
Is that for me or anybody?
Really for anybody, but if you want to jump.
I can chime in first. Since I've been at OSU, I've been teaching in the museum specialization, and I've had to gain relationships with some museums and museum personnel, and I think that museums are really trying. And I think, to jump onto Mariana's case, people are really stuck. You know, they really don't know how to, they know what they want to do, but they don't know how to do it, and they don't know some of the implicit things that happen as far as oppression and power that happens in the museum that they don't really, it's not really cognizant. They're not cognizant of it. So I think that they're really trying to do some things, but you know, there still needs to be a little bit more done. So anybody else can chime in.
Does anybody else have thoughts about?
Yes, I can say that one of the things that kind of confirmed my own perspective, or my own opinions regarding what is pretty much happening all across is that a lot more is happening in terms of programming, but in terms of how the institutions themselves, and this show throughout many of the chapters in the book, you know, that feeling of being stuck, as Mariana said, you know, and I don't know if it's because, you know, a philosophical, you know, approach have to change. Probably that's what happened at the root of the organizations, that a lot more happens in terms of programming, and that's one of the reasons that I'm really happy that the chapter that I wrote with Pat Villeneuve, who created a wonderful curatorial model with a constructivist foundation, made it to this book, because more changes, I think that more changes are needed in terms of, you know, the structures of how we approach exhibitions, and who has, you know, all of these issues with authority and, you know, giving up power and control and all of those things that are very scary for those in those positions. That you know, it really, people don't really welcome change as, you know, easily. So I think that even though a lot of things have been tried, and museums keep trying, and museum educators, in fact, are those that are trying more frequently. There's still a lot more that has to happen inside of the organizations, especially large museums with a lot of different departments, and, you know, more collaboration with curatorial and collections and all of those other parts that, you know, make the whole. So it was interesting for me to confirm that all throughout the book, everybody was mentioning how, you know, this is actually the way it's happening. It's just unfortunately, museum educators are not, in the majority of the cases, in positions that can, you know, make some of those changes, but we can influence. And being, you know, me being an administrator, I guess, you know, I don't see that happening without making a fundamental, you know, like philosophical change in the way we see learning and the way we actually see the museum as part of the community. And that is harder in larger institutions.
Well, and to sort of tag on to that, Alicia, not just having a philosophical change, but implementing that in the practice of the museum. One of the things that in my conversations with Madalena came up often was how big of a deal it was for the Denver Art Museum to invest in her position as a Latino Cultural Programs Coordinator that worked with all the departments across the institution, and to have a full-time funded staff position that wasn't grant funded, that was something that the museum was counting on for years to come, is a huge deal, because programming is wonderful and it's nimble and you can try lots of things, and if something doesn't work, you try something else, but it can also be ephemeral. And I think when you're thinking about sustaining community engagement and thinking about inclusion, that ephemerality can feel a little less substantial than seeing structural changes in the institution. But then I guess there's also the question of how much kind of institutional transparency is even visible to most visitors, and what do they appreciate in terms of, like, museums changing the way that they work.
I think the issue of being ephemeral is also important. I'm glad that you mentioned it, because a lot of times things happen one or two times, but that doesn't mean that, you know, there is constant engagement from those communities that you're reaching by a specific type of programming. So, yeah, so it's very complex.
I can chime in with some other questions too, but I think the issues of the internal structures of museums is, yeah, that is an important one. I think that the it's something that museums are trying to do a lot of changing of the way they do business, but I often wonder how much of the way they're changing business structures and practices really addresses a lot of the issues that come up by all these incredible practices that are covered in this book, and how much that's still a blind spot or a blind area when a museum is trying to become innovative. And Mariana, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that area in terms of the conversations that you and Judy have had about. I've had conversations with Judy just about innovation and innovative practices, and she at the Nelson Atkins did so much great work reaching out to the community and trying to work closely with the community there.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's really challenging, and I think in every institution that I've found, learned about, been inside of, somebody or some small team of people really want this. I think it's getting the whole institution to be ready at the same time. And we know that people are ready at different levels, and I think it is challenging. You make an effort and you get pushback from the strangest quarters. You really don't expect things to come flying out of one quarter. You think this group is okay, but some other group starts to really get a little crazed, or they misunderstand, or they I don't know, maybe it's our culture or the times where people aren't being really thoughtful and trying to listen to what people are trying to say, and instead they tend to react. I think too that, I don't know how to say this exactly, but I'll just say whatever, it's sort of the best way I can figure it out, and maybe that will start some conversation. But well, I think it's an issue of not everybody wants to do the work they have to do to make our institutions truly multicultural. And a lot of times as an evaluator, I find I get some people will call and say, well, we want to attract to this audience or that audience. We want to kind of try to break out of our sort of white Euro-based centric audience and have it look more like our community. And a lot of times they think evaluation is going to solve that problem for them. So that puts me kind of in an interesting position of like, well, I can give you some information, but I can't do the work for you. Like, you have to go and do the work, and you have to look internally. I think in some ways it has to start internally. The senior management, the board, that has to start reflecting the community you want to be.
I agree. I like that you said the board, because what I see now is people who are in like the education department or in other departments saying that they want this goal, but even the demographic that is on the board or in the museum education department, the demographic does not reflect who they want to attract, which that voice needs to be there in order for them to have that idea to include this or that in the museum. So that whole idea needs to be changed, because those people need to be reflected in the board or the education department or the curatorial department. I mean, those people need to be there, which is why I say, since I've been here looking at museums and talking to people, people are trying, but there are some things on another level that they aren't thinking about. So they may try these new programs to bring this demographic in, but they haven't sought out a voice from that demographic to be a consistent figure in the museum. They may have like consultants, but you need someone in there all the time. You need to have a diverse group of people offering feedback and running the space that you want to so badly change.
Yeah, it has to be more than the fill-in-the-blank cultural community advisory board.
Yeah.
It meets a couple of times. I mean, I know I don't want to. I do tend to be flippant, so I'll just go ahead and admit it. But it's just frustrating that they think this is going to solve the problem. I mean, it's the same thing with anything. If we want to reach out to teachers, we have the teacher advisory board, but yet they're not really sitting down and listening and having these true interactive conversations with the audiences they want to attract.
Am I on? Yeah, I mean, I wanted to sort of chime in and say that I think one of the things that the processes that I was going through with Sophia as we were writing this was this feeling that we were talking about work on such a small level, and that in a lot of ways we were saying, like, how is this impacting, like, the whole institution, and feeling that in a lot of, like, you know, I don't know about Sophia, but I was definitely having this concern that, you know, are we really talking about something that can impact a bigger level? But then I realized that in a lot of times too, where it's like we can talk about things on all different levels and how you can impact and affect things on all those levels. And I think a lot of what Sophia and I, as we did this work initially, were thinking about was, you know, we work at a very large institution in a very, very big city, and shifting that is something that's going to really have to come from a much higher level than where we are. But what can we be doing that can really make that experience more inclusive for our audiences? So I think that, you know, in some ways I see, you know, as looking through the book and seeing the kind of work that people are doing and thinking about how it impacts on many levels, and how you can impact change in a smaller area, but you can also think about sort of longer term institutional shifting. Yeah.
Well, the thing about multiculturalism, I mean, Banks talks about this in the theorist talks about this in his framework, is that you need, if you want to have change, you need support from everywhere, you know. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't negate the fact that you can start on the bottom or start in a corner. Mm-hmm. But there does need to be support from many locations, and that's any kind of institution, not just museums. I mean, that's schools, that's community centers, anything that wants to make you know, the big C change. You know, so yeah. I mean, I'm on the same track as you. In the last museum class I taught, the overarching question that kept coming up after we visited multiple museums was, you know, like, what can we do as museum educators when these other people are really in charge of our jobs? Like, should I go in there and be like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and I lose my job, or am I going to, you know, stay there and try to work towards it? You know, what is my place? Like, how can I affect change if I'm this little bitty corner, you know, not really, you know, somebody can kick me out of this place, you know? So that was something big that we talk about all the time, and we never really came up with the answer. And I mean, I don't know the answer, you know. That's the process of talking about it, I think, is the most important part. Thinking about our positionality as educators in this big space, you know, understanding that we can do certain things and affect change in various ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, the whole institution, but, you know.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, I've had plenty of conversations with people where a lot of these, as some of you know, my cat loves to come to these book clubs. She makes an appearance like every time. So I'm keeping her at bay. But she loves, you know, Art Museum Teaching Book Club. Anyway, as I think, like, I think in a lot of ways I've had conversations with people where they find the whole prospect quite daunting. It, you know, immediately kind of like, you know, if I can't, you know, if it's not at this large institutional level where we see these big shifts and we see these huge programming shifts right away, then what can be done? Maybe just nothing. And so, you know, a lot of what, you know, Sophia and I talked about is we wanted people to see that, you know, you can do small things, and you know, big things will happen, but you know, big things don't have to happen first. Mm-hmm. And that there are ways in which you can sort of impact, you know, small corners of the world. You know, so.
Yeah, this is Mariana. I agree, and I need to leave in just a few minutes, but I think that it's something. I was talking with somebody today, and Nicole Stutzman at the Dallas Museum of Art and I were having a conversation, and I said in my younger years, I would see what was possible, and I was only happy if 99.9% of what I envisioned actually came to be. And now, in my later years, I'm just happy if we can nudge the field a little, just 1 degree, maybe even a half a degree, because if you think of sailing, if your compass is shifted even just a half a degree, you will ultimately end up in a different place than you were when you were shifting in the first one. So I think we do have to, I mean, keep the eye on the vision and keep pressing for that, but also be okay if we can just nudge it. It's a big ship to turn, so we have to keep kind of pushing. So I'll see you guys. Sorry I have to leave.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, if I may continue with that idea, actually, I'm going back to diversity in the workplace and all of those things. I mean, from the point of view of someone running an education department, I guess one thing, and that was in one of the chapters, I can't remember which one exactly right now, but even if you're not hiring and can't hire, but at least, you know, you can involve volunteers, and then you're able to involve different kinds of people as docents or as volunteers. That might be one of the ways that, you know, depending on our roles and on how much you know, input we have in those, you know, in those areas. But I mean, it's just you know, underrepresentation of minorities that have been, you know, mentioned, and everybody refers to excellence and equity, and how, you know, we see how much of this has really changed since it was written. So and a lot of things are happening, but, you know, like everybody has been saying over and over, it's just small. Sometimes it's just small changes here and there, or some of the programming that is you know, shifting a little bit and opening some eyes, and, you know, showing things that can happen. So, but, you know, also as an arts administrator, I'm actually glad that, you know, the chapter about excellence and equity, actually, by Wendy and Cyrus, and I believe it might be 5 or 4 or something like that. 3. Oh, okay. There was a mention of something that kept coming to my mind, which is the issue that we need to help more of those minorities get into these types of careers and seeing this as, you know, jobs, because actually not being exposed, you know, early in life to museums and, you know, these kinds of, you know, settings can be, you know, also is damaging also in that, you know, you don't really see that as a career in the future, as the place that you will be welcome even to work in. And try to make the difference somehow. So, and I can say that, like, you know, Veronica can probably, you know, agree or, you know, talk about this a little bit more. But, for example, from the point of view of, you know, Latino or Hispanic communities, and especially even if we switch over to just immigrant communities in general, you know, because Latino doesn't necessarily mean they're immigrants, but so I could switch over also to looking at all immigrants and say, you know, you're coming and have a new life, or your family came before you, and how many times your family would actually encourage, you know, their children to, you know, get into the arts as a career, get into our museums, if it's not, you know, actually something that's going to be, you know, having them, you know, giving them a good, you know, good life in the future. So things like that are also part of culture and part of, you know, the experiences in your, you know, cultural background can actually, you know, getting you a little bit, you know, out of those, you know, routes in a way. So, so how do we encourage, and how do we actually expose everybody, but especially those minority groups of any kind, to know there is a career in museums, and you know, also, you know, what that implies also as well is that, and this could be an entirely different conversation, but how much are the current museum programs actually embracing those, not only embracing those groups as students, but also encouraging them to make a difference when they are out there, when they graduate, and encouraging, you know, those institutional changes that need to happen. So all of those things make it even more complex. But it's just we need to keep trying. I guess it's just the way it is. So we need to be comfortable with trying and knowing if we achieve a little bit, maybe, you know, that's good enough, and just keep trying.
Well,
so,
Alicia, in response to your question, I'm trying to. So we've got tons of questions coming in on the Q&A feature on Google Hangout, and I wanted to try to address a couple of them because I won't get to all of them. And now I'm scrolling back down because there was a really good one submitted by Kiona Hendrick, who's one of the authors of Chapter 18 in the book about critical reflective practice and multiculturalism. And so let me see if I can. She has a two-part question. And let me see if I can find part one. I thought it was a really, here's part one, and then I'll find part two. So her question is, she says, from discussions with peers in the field, it seems like many educators of color are often looked at to bring information about cultural competency and awareness to their colleagues. And while this can be helpful at times, what advice would you offer to, and then I've got the second part of her question right here. What advice would you offer to white educators who wish to begin the process of doing their own work, of developing a deeper understanding of their own cultural identity and become more culturally aware and responsive? And I know it's an issue that Kiona and Melissa deal with in their chapter, and they weren't able to join the Hangout, but Joni, go ahead.
Well, I'll remember the second question because you just said it, but for white art educators, I would say the first thing that I always think about is acknowledging your privilege in the world, in the space that you work in education, in museum education, because without that, I don't think that you can authentically be empathetic because you haven't really dealt with yourself first. So I would say work on your positionality, work on your understanding of how your identity has power, has control, and then after that, they'll be able to better start that critical practice that Melissa and Kiona talk about. I think that their chapter was very strong as far as like giving actual tools. Like we actually offered people strategies, activities to do to just think and reflect. But before I think white educators can do that, I think they have to be knowledgeable about their position in the world in general first, because otherwise I just don't think authentic critical consciousness can be gained before that happens. That's what I think.
I think also acknowledging the importance of listening and ceding ground, and recognizing that, you know, oftentimes in museum education departments you see a lot of white women, and that can be very comfortable spaces within that sort of majority group, but recognizing what it means to listen to the conversation differently, or to sort of not make your point first, and to make space deliberately for the conversation just to go differently, while also, you know, recognizing that you do sort of need to educate yourself, and maybe not solely rely on your colleagues of color to bring all of the cultural competency to the group, because that gets exhausting.
Yeah.
I would say also, I keep going back to, you know, our administration issues, but whenever possible, and I think, you know, stimulating collaboration, I mean, based on, of course, the model that Pat Villeneuve proposes is more suitable for smaller institutions, and in which you put together a curatorial team. But in any cases, any type of collaboration, in my view, any type of you know, way of getting closer with people from other departments would help. For an educator to learn more about, what curators do and what they value, and what, people in other departments, collections, what other people value in their areas, and that can also, help other people understand what the value of the education department is. So any of that, I think, would be beneficial without even intending to, make a dramatic change or sort of like a explicit type of project in which you're going to be collaborating, but at the very least just do an informal effort, because not everybody does, to engage with, to get to know a little bit more about what everybody brings to the table, even if you're not going to be explicitly working together on an exhibition or a specific program. I think it's only beneficial.
There's a really great question that I want to get to too, that as we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left, there are so many good questions, but this one comes from Gretchen Jennings. Let me pop it up. I think that people can view these questions if I click on this. So she writes, and it's something that I actually was thinking a lot about as we've been doing these posts. The media has been having really interesting, sometimes frustrating, sometimes really powerful conversations about race, power, class, community, how we define community based on what's happening in St. Louis and Ferguson, Missouri. And so Gretchen asks, I'm thinking a lot about the museums in St. Louis right now. Could you think of ways museums there might have a role in healing of the community, if not immediately, then in the long term? What are some thoughts about how museums can have a role in something like what's happening in Ferguson right now?
Well, I don't know which chime in first, but I think that this would be a great opportunity for museums to offer a platform for the community to have a voice, which, could mean, using images or just excerpts from people's ideas about their neighborhood, not really focusing on all the negative, but uplifting the neighborhood, because at this point, people are very low, and it seems like there needs to be a process to help people build up more self-worth to those who don't see them as worthy of, walking down the street, just doing everyday stuff. So I feel like a museum could easily give the community a platform to just speak, to be heard, not necessarily having to deal with. They don't have to create visual art. I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to be the focus of their platform, because this is a community that is hurting, and so whatever medium they would like to use, I feel like, it may be oral stories, it may be, narratives, it could be anything. The museum could play a very strong, I feel like they could be critical in helping build this community, just the idea of its worthiness back up.
And sort of along those lines, I think I recently wrote a post about, I think on the Incluseum, about the Santa Cruz Museum's pop-up museum practice, and thinking about that as something that could offer the opportunity for people to bring their objects, to bring their stories, to bring the things that they value into a community location and a gathering that sort of has the museum's, I mean, for better or for worse, it does have this imprimatur of, valuing things. And I feel like this is an opportunity for art museums to take that sort of historical power and sort of cultural authority and share it, and invite people to either document what is currently important to them, what is historically important to them, and to, if possible, provide some sort of a sense of permanence, and maybe kind of the creation of like a flash archive, if you want to think of it that way. And we certainly have that in the form of Twitter, but that's, I think that doesn't have, I don't know, the same sort of it does. I mean, it just doesn't have the same physical feel of being in a space with people sharing the things that you care about. And I think that that could be something that, you know, the art museums in the St. Louis area might do powerfully.
Bradley, you're muted.
Okay. No, as we've been talking about this, it kind of reminded me of the sort of the Anacostia Museum and their sort of model of a very community-generated, very community-curated space that really addressed the realities and concerns and curiosities of a specific community. And I think that, you know, while a lot of the events in Ferguson over the last week have really been emerging out of these social media platforms, a lot of stuff is coming out of Twitter and stuff like that, and it is a very ephemeral, you know, medium and a way of sort of marking this moment in that community's history, and, you know, having museums really kind of creating a great, like an archive and a permanence, and really allowing all members of that community to really kind of add something to that, I think can really, I think that could be a really powerful thing for a community. So, yeah.
Well, since I'm from St. Louis and worked at the St. Louis Art Museum for several years and at the museum at Washington University, I think it is interesting that there are institutions there. I don't know. I haven't been in touch with colleagues there to see if they're, you know, doing some programming. But I know it was Tyler Green who was tweeting about works in the Kemper Art Museum's collection. That's the Kemper Art Museum on Washington University's campus. That relate to race and protest. They've got some really exceptional pieces in their collection. St. Louis Art Museum has incredible pieces in their collection, but they're doing, you know, really great programs. The Romar Bearden Fellowship, Minority Fellowship program there is one that, you know, I think is a sort of you know, a leading program for the career question that we were talking about. Alicia, you were bringing up the idea about careers, and they're doing some really great things in terms of supporting African Americans, especially with museum careers and getting past that sort of, you know, how do you get into museums? How do you get broad-based experience so you can work in development or even in leadership positions or museum education positions, or even curatorial positions? And they've got, you know, more than 30, you know, fellows that have gone on to, you know, many of them have gone on to, you know, as far up as directors of museum positions. It's an incredible thing that the St. Louis Art Museum is doing. It's not an immediate current response thing, but it's something that I think has had a lot of impact. And then the Pulitzer Foundation for the Arts has periodically been doing these conversations that work with socially engaged practice and bringing community members. They're geographically located at a boundary in St. Louis that has a strong racial divide and an economic divide. And they've used the space of their institution to sort of have these conversations. And I think, you know, something is better than nothing, but I also always wonder, like, what role these museums are really playing in these conversations, or is it more of a, you know, feather that an institution can put in its hat? And I think some of the programs, like the Bearden Fellowship, are really making some, I think, really powerful changes. I always wonder if, like, museums being a site for dialogue and listening, is it good? But there's more to do. You know, I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say, I mean, in Los Angeles, the Getty Foundation has a Getty Multicultural Internship program, and this it places multicultural college students in internships, paid internships, in arts organizations all over Los Angeles, and you know, it's been going on for a long time. I'm not exactly sure how long, but many of my colleagues today had their first exposure to working in an art museum through a Getty multicultural internship. And I have to say that I really feel like it has impacted the face of you know, of museums, of museum staff in Los Angeles. That there are, I mean, although I think it's still a very, you know, it is still a majority white. Within education, it's still majority women. But I think that it really has impacted bringing a lot of different people into the field, but that's also a program that's funded at pretty big, pretty big funding. But I think then I really do believe that. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure they have done some studies about that, but it really, I do believe, has changed the face of the field in Los Angeles, at least. So.
There was one other question that comes up, and I'm sort of trying to scroll through a lot of these questions to help sort, to make sure we address some of them. Melissa Crum, who's one of the authors of Chapter 18 with Kiona, again, Joni, you mentioned it, that it's a great chapter with a lot of really practical strategies and tips, and Melissa's commenting on the questions, suggesting a lot of people read that chapter, because I think it is one of the ones that I connected with a lot. And Fiona and Melissa both wrote blog posts for Art Museum Teaching, so they've got follow-ups and more thinking on there as well. But one of the questions that Melissa chimed in about was, how might we ask museums to offer, kind of in follow-up to Gretchen's question about St. Louis, how might we ask museums to offer a platform for the community by seeking artworks and artists that address issues of socioeconomic and other systemic and discriminatory issues? So working on the artists and the art side of things, not necessarily just on the museum educator, program, board, institutional structures, but how do art and artists get involved in some of these issues, help with some of these issues.
I need to go back and look at that question.
Was that a question or a comment?
Well, it's a question in terms of the, here, let me find her question again, just so I don't want to miss her words, and she wasn't able to join the linked conversation, so now I'm trying to find her specific words. But I think,
so she says, how might we ask museums to offer a platform for the community by seeking artworks and artists that address issues of socioeconomic and other systemic and discriminatory issues?
So coming at it from kind of the having artists and artworks that address some of these issues, and not just programs or institutions that address some of these issues. And I think, not necessarily, and maybe I'm misreading your question, but not just even simply the big issue that most art museums still have, which is just representation, of diverse populations across their collections, but even specifically reaching out to artists that are dealing with these issues. Very, both you, Joni, both you and Laura talked about the Fred Wilson, work that Fred Wilson's been doing, and so maybe an example of that, like how does that fit into some of the changes that museums can make in terms of working with artists that are dealing with these issues?
Well, I would say that to me, because I, work on a smaller scale, and I've had the chance of really being, getting to know the artists and all of that in my community. I think that there is also a little bit of a challenge also for large institutions to do that, because mostly, there is more attention to, I would say, the collection, the permanent collection. So it's I think it's part of the outreach as well to know what the local artists are doing and what they can contribute to the table, so that when something like this happens and you need to, you want to make it relevant and you want to engage people from the community, the artists or a way of, finding out more about, so when I say outreach, I guess, in my particular case, I don't only see the audience, but also outreach to the local arts community, because that's the only way you can put together all of those things in your venue. So it would take, I guess it would be difficult for a museum that hasn't reached out all that much to local artists to get it done quickly and address an issue like this. So I don't know how much that has been done in the local area that we're talking about, but it would be tapping on those resources that are local, but knowing already in advance who those artists are and what their work is, have a way of reaching out to them, because it's not going to be easy just to make the connection right away, you know.
Yeah. And I think that this is where it kind of comes in, where how important it is for educators to really be besties with curators. Because, you know, I think because, you know, really what it comes down to is it comes down to sort of, you know, curatorial decisions and also the sort of the collecting focus of an institution, and also working with curators to help kind of everyone, you sort of figure out, you know, the artists that they are contemporary work that they are collecting, or even more historic work that they are collecting, and having this dialogue with their curators about, you know, these are the kinds of issues that, you know, we would really like to be able to talk to our community about, or these are the kinds of things that people are asking to, you know, to see. So how can maybe the things that we're collecting that might not at first address that issue, how might we like think about them in a way that really does open up those conversations in it, you know. So I think, you know, I'm all for educator curator, you know, friendships. And a lot of, and I think, you know, a lot of talking very openly and honestly, and you know, being very transparent with your curatorial teams about the communities and the kinds of, you know, these set of platforms that you do want to create, so they can really kind of have that in mind when they're looking at the collections that they do have, and also thinking about acquiring new work. Make your curator your best friend.
Also,
yeah. Oh,
go ahead, Veronica.
Oh, okay, sure. I was just going to say, reiterate how important those educator-curatorial partnerships are. And, you know, in framing what artwork, or rather, what issues you want to talk about through the collection, I think that's a really important issue. And I also know that there can often be some sort of curatorial hesitation to instrumentalize the artwork and to feel like you're getting things just so that you can, you know, do a particular type of discussion or do a particular type of program or represent a particular type of person. And I think one thing that might be helpful is to have a little list of the artists that you're looking at, so that you can sort of engage the conversation from both sides of thinking, all right, these are significant artists that we really could represent in the collection, and by having them we could also then do this important work on the education side. And so kind of recognizing that curators often have a different kind of philosophical concern for the care of the collection and kind of establishing how it all works together. And it can be really hard if you are making a departure from where your collection currently stands into this new stream of acquisitions, and feeling like, you know, the pieces that are meant to diversify your collection are not standing totally by themselves, as, you know, the loners who will get grouped together in a gallery so that you can have your conversations about inclusion and multiculturalism and diversity. That's not really including the works within the broader scope of the collection either.
Yeah, I also think, you know, curators are very reticent to think that a work of art is about one thing. Like if it's about this one community issue, or it's about this one thing. So, you know, I think sometimes there can be that hesitation to frame a work of art in, you know, in one way. Which I
actually think that also, going back to Gretchen's question, and going back a little bit to what Veronica mentioned about listening, there's a lot of listening that needs to happen, you know, that needs to happen anyway, from all of us. Everybody has their own priorities inside of the institution, but at the same time, we also listen to the visitors and what is important to them. But at the same time, you know, Mike also mentioned how this is, you know, an event like this would be an opportunity for the museum to become a forum, for example, to discuss, you know, issues. And how about the museum invites local artists as well, and it's not only about the most apparent issues that, but you can approach it also from the point of view of how artists have addressed those issues in their works, and make artists from the community become part of those conversations about the current issues. So that would be another way of, still, doing something that's related to art, but at the same time we'll put it in a personal context and in a social context for the community in a relevant way.
Yeah, I think so much of it seems to be about letting go of some of the assumptions that museums internally are making about how the community gets involved and how much is okay for the community to get involved. When it comes to local artists, a lot of the sort of big public art museums in this country kind of sometimes, not all of them, but many of them draw lines in terms of, how local can you be, or are you like super famous and you happen to be local, or are, and how do you engage with local artists? But I do think it's a good point that's come up in terms of bringing artistic practice into this conversation, and with, in terms of a community dialogue. It's different to have, if you're in, let's say, for example, St. Louis, having a New York-based artist come in sort of from the outside and do a project that relates to what's going on there, versus actually having an institution engage with local artists and maybe have community voice and community involvement in who those artists are, and opening it up a little more. Some museums are doing a really fantastic job of that, but I think it's something that many of the bigger institutions need to learn lessons from the smaller, more nimble institutions about kind of opening it up and letting go a little bit. We're running out of time, and I always try to keep these things to within less than an hour, but I did want to turn it back to you, Joni, and see if you wanted to add in any last words or kind of concluding thoughts based on anything that we've said, or just the book project itself.
I do want to say that I think, I'm a bit biased, but I love this book. And I think it's super relevant at this point in time. That's it. As we talked about, we sometimes get apprehensive about how our change presents itself. Is it big enough? Is it too small? But I think that each chapter offers a little nugget of hope to any educator who wants to be conscious in the museum space. Like, some people get discouraged because someone above them has knocked them down to say, no, we're not doing that. But I think all of these stories, the interviews, the simple stories about what they did to the family guides, or the different programs, the curriculum, I think it just really offers hope to people, encouraged to keep going with the work, because it's so easy to let people knock you down when you're really trying to do social justice work. Like, it's a constant struggle, and I like the book in that way because it tells the truth. Like, sometimes you get stuck, and sometimes it works out. These are the things that happened to me when I was trying to get through this. This worked, this didn't, and so I feel like the book offers a great scope of what it means and what it looks like to actually do multicultural work. And sometimes it's it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think that the book just really offers you a bit of hope and courage to continue to go on, because it's very easy to get knocked down when you're doing work that really takes courage, a fight. So those are my closing arguments.
Great, thank you, Joni. I think the book, I think it's going to do a tremendous job in terms of helping museums get unstuck and to continue down to just push things forward. I definitely, I'm a big fan of the book, and I wasn't even involved in it. I think it's incredible, and I recommend, education departments to get a copy of it, pass around chapters, and dive into the ones that make sense. There's so many case study chapters in the book. There's really so much out there. Thank you so much, Joni, and thanks to Laura for working with us to set up today, even though she wasn't able to join us. She's recently relocated to Australia. But thank you, and then thank you to Briley, Alicia, and Veronica for joining us, and to Mariana, who had to leave a little earlier. Great conversation, and I hope we can continue the conversation online. We've got, I think, one more post coming up that relates to the book. And I encourage people to go on to artmuseumteaching.com and take a look at the other posts that are on there, especially we've got Kiona and Melissa, who weren't part of the conversation but we referred to a lot. They're chapter 18 in the book that we can connect with online too. So thank you, everybody, and I'll see you.
Can I do one more thing?
Yeah, definitely, Joni. Go ahead.
I thank all the authors in the book. These chapters were amazing. It was great looking through your work. I just want to say, we wouldn't have a book without you. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your courage to continue to write about this. And yeah, rock on.
Perfect way to end. Thank you all so much. See you online.